I'm super excited to talk to you today, Dee Ann. Super excited that you were able to make some time to come on. Um, and I just want to dive into a little bit of your past here and all the awesome experience you've had here at Chick-fil-A and beyond that. So when you first started at Chick-fil-A, was it 32 years ago?
Well, actually, so I've been retired from Chick-fil-A for 2.5 years. So it's
Yeah.
about, in fact, let's see, today is the third. Tomorrow would have been my 35th anniversary at Chick-fil-A.
Wow. That's amazing.
Yeah.
That is amazing. So when you first started there, 35 years ago, what was the culture of Chick-fil-A like? Can you kind of tell a story of what it was like when you first entered in as you started in, I would assume you weren't right away in that VP of talent and sustainability role. What did that look like when you were young in your career?
Wow, it was so fun. I mean, there were lots of seasons that were fun at Chick-fil-A, but that particular season was fun because it was, it's funny. Many of us, were in the group that retired in 2018. And, we were so young then. We were just out of college and we were this small entrepreneurial company. It wasn't quite a startup, but it wasn't much more than that. There were 150 restaurants doing about 175 million in revenue with less than 100 people on the corporate staff. And so what was so great about the culture, number one, it was very close knit. When you went to lunch in the on-site cafeteria, which it was a cafeteria in those days, you'd sit down with the founder, Truett Cathy, and have lunch, or other executives in the organization. And what a great way to be mentored and to come along is to have those personal interactions with the leaders in the company. So it had a real entrepreneurial spirit to it. It had a real heart for service spirit to it, which continued all the days that I worked for Chick-fil-A. But our role there was to support the franchisees who were serving both their employees and their guests. And so there was a real heart for service. It was a real caring environment. We likened it to a family because that was, we spent a lot of time together in those days. It was hard work and work hard and play hard, and very much like a family setting. So I think that caring environment and how much people cared about you in that environment had a lot to do with why I stayed there for 33 years. And then I guess the other reason I stayed there so long is it was a purpose-driven organization. Chick-fil-A knows their why. They knew their why. Every day we showed up, we looked at the corporate purpose because it was on a stone outside the building. And you walked right by it and you knew that, you weren't in the chicken business, you were in the people business. And you had a purpose for being there that went far beyond selling great chicken.
Yeah, I've heard you say that, and I've heard Chick-fil-A team members say that it's not about the chicken, we're in the people business. And that relates to so many people. I think there's a lot of young people who are trying to figure out, what is my calling? What am I here to do? And it can be tough, right? When you're selling chicken sandwiches or you're selling ice cream and milk, and it's hard to really dial in on, all right, is this what I'm supposed to be doing? But how would you focus on people, whether it was employees or customers? What was your main focus on, really that was the mission of Chick-fil-A? What was your vision on really dialing in on people, and how did you dial that in and decide this is how we're going to help people and this is how we're going to be a people driven organization?
Well, from my perspective and the role that I had, I think the first thing is understanding that people decisions are the most important decisions that an organization makes. All kinds of people decisions. It starts with who you select to be part of your team, and certainly how you steward that talent along the way. And so for me, when you say, how are you dialed in? I was dialed in from the perspective of selecting extraordinary talent and stewarding them well. So I was looking for people whose character matches the organization. When you stop and think about the fact that the culture of an organization is made up of the sum total of the character of the people in the organization, and then looking for competency that matched the role, and not just the role for that time, but we were this dynamic, growing organization. I mean, for all the years I was there, we were talking about, astronomical growth.
Yeah.
I told you how small we were when I started. When I left, we were about $11 billion in 2,500 restaurants, and about 2,000 people on the corporate staff. So huge growth over that time. And so it was, you were looking for people that didn't just match the roles you had currently, but thinking ahead to the future roles that you would need competency for. And then lastly, people whose chemistry matched the team. And when I talk about chemistry, I'm not just talking about people who get along well or have a similar personality. I'm really talking about people who bring their different perspectives to the table, look for the win-win, the common ground, share their perspective in such a collaborative way that they're actually influential. And so all of those things, I think, contributed to the success that they've enjoyed, and other organizations, as now, I spend my time with many, many other organizations.
That's awesome. No, one thing you said there, and I've heard you say in previous interviews, is that you really learned how to listen to people as you were growing in the Chick-fil-A culture. And I think that's something that I am struggling with as like a young person, is really listening to people, not to respond, but to understand. Can you talk a little bit about what you learned through that? And because we can be so easily manipulated into listen to respond, and what's the next thing that I want to say, what's the agenda that I kind of want to push, but what's the importance of really listening to understand people?
Well, when I think about that, I think about one of the greatest books I read in my career, which was The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People by Stephen Covey. And habit number 5 is this: seek first to understand and then be understood. So that seek first is really about listening for understanding, really listening to the other person's point of view, the idea they're trying to share with you. And then once you've thoroughly listened without interrupting, without thinking about what you're going to say next, digesting that, and then being sure you're clearly understood. That's the other half of that. And so that both of those pieces are really important: listening first, understanding, but then being sure you're understood in the conversation too. And I would say for me, that was a game changer during my career. Early on, I was not a great listener. I was thinking, part of it was my brain was going fast, and I was thinking about what needed to happen next, what my agenda was, what my focus was. And then I learned that by listening, I often changed my mind. I often saw a better idea, a better perspective. As my career went on, early on, I in the talent area, when I led that area, I did almost every single job anybody performed in that area. But very intentionally, as my career went on, I selected talent that was smarter than me, that was more capable than me. And if you're going to do that, you sure better listen to them. For one reason, you won't get the best ideas, but the second is you'll clearly frustrate them, and they'll be looking for another job before long if you select extraordinary talent and then you don't listen to their ideas. So very, very important if you're going to expand your leadership capability is to be a good listener, and then be a clear communicator about your own point of view.
Yeah, I've heard, I didn't hear the last part of that. That was so good. The seek to be understood after you understand as well. Because I think a lot of times we can leave people in kind of a cloud of misunderstanding when we don't clearly communicate it, and it can be really confusing because they think, yeah, I'm being understood, but I have no idea what they were saying. What would you say, Dee Ann, were a couple of the frustrations you had really early on in your career?
That's a great question, Trevor, because generally, and I guess this may be the answer to your question, but I also had to make another change of something about mid-career. And it was some great advice that one of my bosses gave to me. And he called me aside one time. He said, "Dee Ann, I don't know what it is that you need to do before you get here every day. Start your day differently, do something differently, but you got to show up as a really positive leader." And I think that, what was happening in my life at the time is I had a husband who had his own career, small children, a lot of work responsibility. HR is a very stressful field in most any company. And I was showing up stressed, and probably, even though I wasn't unhappy, I probably appeared that way, and not positive.
Mm.
And so he gave me that great advice, and I totally changed. I changed so much that by the end of my career, I actually got accused of being too positive, that I was always seeing the sunny side of everything, which I
Sure.
still do. And I think that's a much better, I mean, I've seen the other side. I've done it that way. So I know that it's better to see the positive in things. But that was one of the things I think early on, is managing stress. I didn't do that well. So I had to,
Mm.
and it wasn't just work stress, it was just life stress. And I had to learn about that. So that would probably be one. And I think the other frustration was probably, recognizing, I became Chick-fil-A's first female officer, and that was quite a journey. That was actually never my intention. I used to call myself the accidental VP. I wasn't trying for a certain position. I loved my work. I
Mm.
loved what I was doing. I mean, I looked forward to Mondays, and I was kind of sad on Friday. I know that's a little sick, but that's how much I loved what I was doing. And so I was just going about what I was doing. And one day I called in the president's office and told I was going to be a VP. And
Wow.
literally it kind of happened that way. But then it was soon after that I realized what a responsibility that was, to create a path for others. And if
Mm.
I didn't do it well, I might close down that path for some people who would follow me. And so it felt like, quite the responsibility.
Sure. No, those are really good answers. What's the importance? You spoke a little bit about you really loved your job, like you got sad on Fridays. What is the importance of loving your job? If you don't have that desire of wanting to be there on Monday and getting sad to leave there on Friday, would you say that's a key that you're kind of in the wrong thing, or are you just doing it the wrong way?
Well, it could be either one.
Mhm.
I found, I didn't, when it first started, I would tell you that I worked like that because I loved the company. It was a
Sure.
great culture. I mean, it
Yeah.
was a fantastic culture. But really, I fell in love with the work itself when I understood that my calling was to help other people find their calling. That was really the
Mm.
turning point for me. So I did discover my calling at Chick-fil-A. I didn't know that before I went there. So I went there because I needed a job, like lots of people do. In
Right.
fact, I was supposed to be in a whole different field and ended up in human resources. So I had no idea that was it. But here's what I say. I think everybody should eventually find what it is they're supposed to do. But if you don't know that when you get out of school and you're starting out, just get started in something.
Mm.
You'll work your way into that if you just keep at it. But
Sure.
sometimes people are stalled out. It's like, well, this isn't what I want to do. I don't want that job because that's not really what I want to do. Well, sometimes that's just part of your path to get to
Mm.
what you're meant to do. And so, um, while I don't think anybody should ever stay in a miserable job, you have to get started somewhere. And so, at different times in history, there are different opportunities. Right now, it's not a great time, right? So
Right.
you just need to get started. But it was just 2 years ago that, somebody, Trevor, your age group, you'd have so many opportunities you wouldn't know where to start.
That's
You'd be
right.
overwhelmed with opportunities.
You're right. Yeah, you had more choices in 2018. Absolutely. Say one thing, Dee Ann, that I wanted to ask you, and I've just always been curious about this. All my friends are curious about this. Is the customer service at Chick-fil-A is just so good. I mean, we have one right down the road from my work, and one thing that I always notice is the employees are always walking around, taking people's trays, asking for fill up on drinks, which is just so much different than um, any other fast food restaurant chain. And I always notice when they take your tray, they just say, "My pleasure." If you say thank you, they say, "My pleasure." Now, what really inspired that, and what led you to become so much better than all these other fast food chains? Where did those ideas come from? Both my pleasure and the service that goes beyond what you expect at a fast food restaurant.
Oh, wow. Trevor, we could do an entire two-part podcast just on the question you just asked. So let me try
Sure.
to hit that for you in as quickly and as I can. First of all, the my pleasure concept actually came from Truett Cathy, the founder of Chick-fil-A, spending time with Horst Schulze at the Ritz-Carlton hotels. When a guest at Ritz-Carlton said thank you to a Ritz-Carlton employee, their response would be my pleasure. And
Mm.
Truett really liked that. He liked it much better than what he heard in his restaurants, which was often either you're welcome or no problem, or perhaps nothing at all. And so um, he liked it so much that he came to the annual convention of Chick-fil-A operators and told a long version of the story that I just told you. And he said, so I like it so much that we have a new rule at Chick-fil-A. And the rule, which rules were very uncommon, is that when a guest says thank you, I'd like your team members to say my pleasure. So we all went away and nothing happened. And to make a long story short, this went on for 10 years, Trevor.
No
The
kidding.
CEO of the company kept coming back and making this request of his franchisees, but nothing changed. So the 10th year he came back and he was pretty firm. In fact, as I remember, he kind of slammed his fist down on the podium, which would be a little unusual for Truett. And he said, now I mean it. When your guests say thank you, I want your team members to say my pleasure. He actually had us stand up right where we were, practice it a few times. After that, his son, Dan, who's now the CEO of Chick-fil-A, said, I think Dad means it. And so he said, this is a rule. We're going to say my pleasure. Well, rules, Chick-fil-A's culture is really founded in teaching principles and allowing people the freedom to apply them, not requiring compliance to rules. So Chick-fil-A franchisees are the heroes of this story because they didn't take it back to their team members as a rule. They took it back to their team members as a principle. And they explained to them that, of course, it's our pleasure to serve guests, because without guests, we wouldn't have a business at all. We wouldn't have jobs. We wouldn't get promotions. We wouldn't get raises or college scholarships or team outings or holiday parties. None of that would exist without the guest. And so they taught them that principle. And that's why when you go to a Chick-fil-A restaurant, you get a really sincere, my pleasure.
Yeah.
Instead of, it's my pleasure, it's my pleasure, my pleasure, my pleasure, a rote response like that.
Sure.
Well, that was the language of what we called at Chick-fil-A second mile service. You know what first mile service is, right? It's getting the order correct. It's friendly service. It's in a reasonable amount of time. But second mile service is competitive advantage. And with that, what had happened is that Chick-fil-A's competitors had started copying the chicken sandwich. And Chick-fil-A wasn't the only one in the chicken sandwich business anymore. And so we had to compete at a different level. So we decided to compete with service. And it started out as some rules too at first, but then it evolved. And it evolved into a principle. What did we really want to happen with second mile service? Well, we wanted every guest on every visit to experience some element of second mile service. But what we realized is that if we gave the franchisees and their team members freedom to decide what that element is for their guest, then it was delivered much more consistently and much more often than if we made a rule about what that looks like. So we said, franchisees, you figure out what that is for your guests and your employees. Well, what happened next was totally disruptive to the fast food industry. And we started at the support center, we started receiving emails and letters and phone calls about these remarkable things these team members were doing. You know, they were doing everything from a stranded couple in a hurricane, sending a boat after them to rescue them, to changing tires in the parking lot and jumping off dead batteries and rescuing choking children in the back seat, diving through the drive-through window. Remarkable.
Wow.
And amazing customer service. And so I think that's the imprint that Chick-fil-A made on the marketplace. And you can't get there without having this foundation of a remarkable organizational culture where you have a defined, meaningful purpose and a challenging mission and demonstrated core values. And then you stack on top of that extraordinary talent that you select by people whose character matches the organization, whose competency matches the role, and whose chemistry matches the team. You teach them the concept of creating amazing customer experiences. And then when that's done consistently, it really you become known for legendary customer service. And that's what happened at Chick-fil-A.
That's incredible. I know when I go to McDonald's, I don't even think I get first mile service anymore. Usually my order's wrong and it's 10 minutes late. So Chick-fil-A is really doing something incredible. And the way I see Chick-fil-A now is me and my wife love it. And we don't even see it as like a fast food restaurant anymore. We see it as we go and we leave feeling better, and we leave always going, holy smokes, how do they do that? That is amazing. Dee Ann, I want to hit on your couple of books that you have out right now. The first one being Bet on Talent, and then Crush Your Career coming in March of 2021, which I'm super excited to talk about as well. But you hit on those three things that you would look for in every Chick-fil-A employee that you were hiring when you were VP of Talent. Can you hit on those three things one more time and just share those with the audience again?
I'm selecting extraordinary talent. I'm looking at three things. The first thing I'm looking at is character that matches the organization. That's so critical because the culture of your organization is made up of the sum total of the character of the people within the organization. So how do you look for character? Well, if your organization has a meaningful purpose and challenging mission and demonstrated core values, I'm interested in how the personal purpose, mission, and core values of an individual align with my organization. Of course, they don't have to be exactly the same, but do they align? And what does this person value in terms of purpose, mission, and values? And then, so that's character. Secondly, I'm looking for competency. And obviously, competency is finding people who know how to do what you need to be done. But it's more than just that current role. It's thinking about future jobs. Some might not even be invented yet. But does this person have competency to grow with the organization? So, for example, I selected thousands of Chick-fil-A franchisees when I was with the company. And the most challenging part at one point in my career was when we were transitioning from mall restaurants to freestanding restaurants. Mall restaurants had a small footprint, fewer employees, no drive-through, no parking lot. I could go on and on about the difference. You can see how the competency level that you need for a mall restaurant and the complexity of it might be not quite the same as what you need for a $5 or $6 million freestanding restaurant. But the problem is that we knew we were going to open more and more freestanders and have less and less mall opportunities. So I had to project, because these people would be the ones that would move into the freestanding locations. They had to be able to grow with the organization. If they only had the capability to run a smaller volume restaurant with a smaller footprint and fewer employees, then they wouldn't be able to grow with the organization. And the idea of terminating a large number of people unable to grow wasn't what we had in mind at all. So that was really tricky. That was hard to be able to identify that. And then lastly, chemistry that matches the team. And in chemistry, I'm not looking for people that all think alike and get along together. It's really nice if your team gets along. It's more fun if they get along. But really, when I think of chemistry, I'm looking for people who have the ability to collaborate with the rest of the team, look for the win-win, the common ground, but at the same time, bring their very different perspective to the table in such a productive way that they're able to influence the team. To me, that's great chemistry. So that was my process and of what I was looking for when I was selecting talent.
That's so good. Dee Ann, what would you say for a person that's in a culture right now that they're looking to expand and grow that culture in a really positive way, in a way similar to the way you came in and did that with Chick-fil-A? Granted, when you came into Chick-fil-A, it sounds like the culture was already semi-built, but to be able to expand that into did you say the 2,500 locations that Chick-fil-A now has from the 150 that it had when you first got there? What are some key ways that someone can come in and focus on building a great culture?
Sure. The interesting thing about it is that the culture, which was largely dependent on the the personality of the owner, the leader, Truett Cathy himself, was in place, but it hadn't been defined and communicated as clearly as it was later, which was a large part of what I did during my career, is help communicate that. Because the larger you become, the more clear you have to be about that communication. There was no more eating with the CEO necessarily in the cafe every day that started when I came there, and there was a small number of people. So for other organizations, when you're trying to start and create this, you start with knowing your why. I think you always start with a purpose, and it doesn't change. It's the reason you exist at all. So define that, write it down, get buy-in to it. Once you have your why, then you can think about the what. What is the big goal we're trying to achieve? That becomes your mission. And while the why doesn't change, the mission sometimes, well, in fact, the mission does change. When you achieve your mission, you move on to a new mission. You have to declare what you're going to do next. And great talent constantly wants to have the opportunity to work on a challenging mission. And then lastly, you have to decide what your core beliefs are and what behaviors demonstrate those core beliefs. So that's your core values. And as I said before, if you just put those on a wall, or you send them out in social media, or you make them the screensaver on the computer, but no one demonstrates those core values, then they don't work. They don't stick. You have to have leadership to do that. Sometimes what organizations want to do is go on a 2-day retreat and create everything I just said. It's really okay if it takes time to get the words right, to get the meaning right, because the next thing you have to do when you make all those decisions is you have to get buy-in. By the way, one of the ways you're going to get buy-in is actually have people participate in that process. But you're going to have to get buy-in at every level of the organization. And if you rush it, if you put something out there that's not authentic, that doesn't hold any credibility, let me give you an example. If one of your values is we're here to serve, but the leaders in the organization are elitist and are selfish people who don't put others before themselves, that will never have any stickiness to it. I mean, it won't have any credibility. So take your time with these things to make sure you get the right elements and that you're prepared as leaders to live it out, because if you don't, it won't be authentic and you'll fail at it.
Yeah. Do you think you can have a successful, and I guess successful is a relative term, but let's define successful as, a long-term, solid business. Okay. You're just constantly growing. You really get into a sweet spot where you feel like you're doing well. Can you become that business without a good culture?
I guess you're asking me really how successful can you become without a strong culture. I think you can become a successful business for a period of time.
Sure.
But I don't think you can become a sustainable business without a strong culture, and be, an enduring business and continue to stay in business if you don't have a culture that attracts the very best talent to your organization.
Yeah, that's so good. What do you think is the biggest mistake you see companies make when they're in the hiring process?
Well, first of all, I think sometimes they're just too quick. I like to spend more time on selecting talent and making the right decision so I don't have to make changes later. Some companies are quick to hire and quick to fire, and that's okay. I actually would like to be, slow to hire and slow to fire. Because if you're investing in your talent up front and making great selections, you're going to have a lot less investment to make on the back end. And, when I went to Chick-fil-A, I had no termination budget. I thought that was the strangest thing. I had this healthy budget to select people, but I had no budget for terminating people, no outplacement, no severance package, none of that. And I came to learn that the expectation is you make great people decisions, you take your time and make the right decision, and you won't have a need for any of those things. Very few organizations understand that concept. And why? Because they're hurting. They need to fill a gap. They need to get the role filled. They need to get
Right.
people on the job because they're losing money or productivity or whatever without a body in that position. But I've found that it's just better to get the right person than it is to rush that. So I think that's probably the biggest mistake people make.
Yeah, that's really good. Well, you got a new book coming out, Dee Ann, is it March of 2021?
March the 2nd,
March the
2021.
2nd. It's called Crush Your Career, and it's all about, I mean, it's very heavily tailored towards young professionals. Is that right?
That's right. Yeah.
That are looking to crush their career. I think there's a lot of millennials and a lot of young people who are looking to find what they love and kind of like you did, Dee Ann, find what you love to do and do it really well, do it to the best of your ability. Can you tell us a little bit about that book and give us a little preview?
Sure. So it's Crush Your Career, Ace the Interview, Land the Job, and Launch Your Future. And the audience is 20 to 35-year-olds and the people who coach them. So parents and career counselors and coaches and mentors and leaders. But it's really about the life cycle of your career, starting with part-time jobs, and it actually goes all the way to retirement. And I know you're not thinking about that right now, Trevor, but you'll be amazed how quick it comes.
I bet I will.
And so the best time to prepare for retirement actually is where you are right now. So it covers all of that. But my favorite parts of the book is really the early career part, really helping you know how to go about finding your calling and then pursuing a role that matches your calling, how to conquer your first 90 days on the job, how to navigate landmines. The reason that's the favorite is I actually share mistakes that I made in the book and what I've learned since then. And I'm trying to help people like you have the same pitfalls. You can avoid that just by learning from my lessons. You don't have to learn your own that way.
Sure.
But that's one of my favorite parts of the book. And then it goes into, you're a young leader, some leadership ideas and how to grow as a leader and how to grow yourself. So it's really a manual about how to manage your career. And I'm really excited about that. I haven't really told anybody this yet, I don't think, but it's going to be released with a podcast series and with an e-course. And so I'm pretty excited about the impact that it might have on this generation of emerging talent.
Absolutely. No, I think that's phenomenal. I think that we all have those questions throughout our career of, all right, what step do I take next? Even as you're looking to ace the interview, as you said, there are questions of how do I go about an interview? And how do I speak to this company without, blowing smoke and saying, I've always wanted to work here, when maybe you haven't, but you just need a job. What are a couple tips you have to young people to ace an interview?
Oh, wow. Well, first of all, you need to do your research. Don't go into an interview that you haven't researched the organization and hopefully who you're interviewing with. You have so many resources now. I mean, it's so easy to go on LinkedIn and learn about the person you're interviewing with. So number one, know where you're headed. And number two, know yourself. Practice this. Find a mentor or a buddy or somebody that you actually, especially virtual interviews, they're actually harder to speak into a camera than it is to a live person. So there are so many resources online right now, whether it's Glassdoor or Indeed or even LinkedIn. I mean, there's so many resources of what questions you're probably going to be asked. So develop an answer and then practice answering those questions. Record yourself doing that so that you can be very, very prepared. Of course, the book is chock full of all kinds of ideas, but those are the two that come to mind. Know yourself and know the organization that you're interviewing with.
That's great. Well, Dee Ann, I've got a few final questions for you. And I think you hit on one of these earlier. But you talked a little bit about maybe having a morning routine earlier. Do you have a morning routine? And if so, what does that look like?
Absolutely. It's my most treasured time of day. And it did come out of that discussion with my boss. And what I did at the time is I got up in the morning an hour earlier than everybody else in my household. And having three young sons at home, and again, a husband who he had some pretty crazy work hours at that point in his life, that sometimes meant that was really early, like way before dawn, to have a quiet time. And that time for me was prayer and scripture and exercise and just having a better way to start my day. It grew over time as my sons got older and didn't need as much attention in the morning. I didn't have to get up quite so early. And by the time they left the house, I was looking forward to that time every day. And do you know, even though I'm retired from Chick-fil-A, I own my own business. I own my schedule. I set my alarm every morning because I treasure that time to get up. And when I go to bed looking forward to it. Because I know how much it refreshes me, it prepares me for my day, and how crucial it is. And I've never met anyone who employs that practice who doesn't say the exact same thing.
How early on in your career, Dee Ann, did you start that morning routine?
Oh, let's see. Let me think about it. Probably about 10 years into it. So I'm giving you a hint. You can be ahead of me in this, Trevor. And your listeners can start earlier, but I wish that it was a habit I had started sooner.
Did you journal at all during that time, Dee Ann? Did you journal about what you had coming up in the day or what happened the day before or anything like that?
Yeah, I journaled differently throughout my lifetime. At times it was deeper, and other times it was just surface notes.
Sure.
At this point in my life, that is my most creative time of day. So if I have a blog post to write, I'm likely writing it in those early morning hours. Or if I'm trying to create a new presentation, a talk I'm going to give for an organization, sometimes that happens in those early morning hours.
Okay.
I have found for me, if I get writer's block when I'm writing a book, I will dedicate my earliest hours to writing. And if I get a block, I'll go jump on my Peloton or my paddleboard if it's the summertime, or just a walk on the bike trails. And that'll get all those great endorphins going, and it'll re-stimulate my creativity. And literally I go sit down and write before I even take a shower, because I want to be sure that all that gets out on paper.
That's so great. Yeah, I have a couple buddies who we've been trying to get into morning routines. And so that has looked like getting up at 5:30 and working out and trying to journal. And I struggle with just trying to figure out what to write about and what to journal about. So it's good to hear about that it can look different in different stages of life. Some days you might feel like sitting down and journaling for an hour. And some days you might just have a 5-minute reflection time of what happened the day before. Dee Ann, what would you say is the best book you've read this year outside of your own books?
All right. So there are two books, and I'm going to be honest. One of them I read last year, and the other is a recurring book. But because of your audience, Trevor, and the Mentor Me podcast, I want to tell you about these two books. The first one that I recommend to every person starting their career, mid-career, even older people like me, is James Clear's Atomic Habits. And it's really piggybacking on what you and I just talked about. His book is outstanding. It's a great manual. I wish I'd had it when I started my career, because I think your habits have so much to do with your success. So Atomic Habits by James Clear. And then the other book that I would suggest to every person reading is Dr. Henry Cloud's book, Integrity. And that's just one of my all-time favorites. I read a lot of books, somewhere between 50 and 100 books a year is my goal, depending on what's going on. When I'm writing my own book, it's, believe it or not, it's actually harder to read during that time. So this year it's going to be more of a 50 book year since I wrote a new book. But when I thought of books to recommend to you all and your listeners, I think those two are really powerful.
Yeah, I've heard of Atomic Habits. I've read stuff by Dr. Henry Cloud. I've read The Power of the Other by him. And he's just, so good. And I follow James Clear on social media, and he has some good stuff. Dee Ann, this is kind of an off the cuff question. What out there is your favorite brand that does customer service really well? Maybe not to the extent that Chick-fil-A does it, But what's a brand out there that you notice does customer service extremely well?
Oh, I've actually developed quite a list.
Have you?
Since I started this work, and I talk on one of my talks is, the secret sauce of legendary customer service.
Hmm.
Um, so a hotel brand, I don't get to stay there very often. But the few times I have, and sometimes it's been for speaking engagements, is the Four Seasons Hotels and Resorts. They are one of my favorites, and their service is impeccable.
Hmm.
And it lives, you pay a lot to stay there, and they provide a lot of value. Nothing is beyond them. We had the opportunity to travel to London right before all this happened, and I'm right before the COVID experience happened, and as we stayed at the Four Seasons there, and we booked a tour of the London Tower through them. And so we went on this tour. When we got back that afternoon, in our room was a photo already encased in a plexiglass frame from that day of my husband and me.
No
I mean,
way.
that's just like exceeding every possible thing. The language that they use for their guests, I really appreciate. If you want to book a room and they have no vacancy, they don't say we have no vacancy. They don't say we don't have any rooms, we're sold out. They don't use any of those terms. They say we're sorry, but we're fully committed for those dates. That tells me, what that communicates is we are fully committed to our current guest. And when you reserve a room and you're going to be with us, we'll be fully committed to you then too. So that's one of the brands I like. I love Zappos. Zappos has a policy that's off the charts, which is if you can't find what you're looking for on their website, if you'll contact them, the customer service rep is empowered to find the item you're looking for on a competitor's website and direct you to it. That's pretty outstanding customer service.
That's amazing. It sounds like the vocabulary that companies use is very important as well. Whether it's Chick-fil-A or Zappos or whoever it is, sounds like they don't use the typical vocabulary that a normal company, quote unquote, uses. Is that what you found at Chick-fil-A?
Yes, generally they organizations who excel in customer service will create their own vocabulary. Just like we did at Chick-fil-A, make second mile second nature, and it's my pleasure, and treat everyone with honor, dignity, and respect. You come up with your own vocabulary of how to serve your guest.
That's amazing. Well, Dee Ann, thank you so much for coming on the Mentor Me podcast. Where can people find you? I know you have is it a weekly blog post? Where can they find you on your website, where you're speaking when it's not COVID maybe? And where can they find your books?
Sure, absolutely. Well, my website is Dee Ann, Deann Turner, TURNER.com. And you can email me through that. You can find out about booking me for speaking, etc., through that website. I hope you'll connect with me on LinkedIn. Love to post content there most every day, including my weekly blog post. And then also my Facebook author page, which is Dee Ann Turner Author. You can connect with me there, and Instagram at Dee Ann Turner. And I also have a YouTube channel. So Google me there and pull up those videos. You can see some of the places that I've spoken and hear some of my messages.
And then a new book called Crush Your Career coming out is it March 2nd?
March 2nd. And I hope all your
2nd.
listeners will go ahead and pre-order that on Amazon.
There you go. Well, thank you so much, Dee Ann. I really, really appreciate it.
Thank you, Trevor. It's been my pleasure to be with you today.